The wind over Massachusetts Bay carried the sound of waves and sermons. It was the 1630s, and Puritan New England was a world built on order. God's order, men's order. Every word, every thought, every woman's silence was a part of that sacred design. But then came Anne Hutchinson. She was not the type of rebel who shouted or carried a sword. Her weapon was her voice, soft, thoughtful, dangerous. She was a midwife, a mother of 15, and a devout believer in God. But what made her different was this. She believed that God spoke not only through ministers, but directly to the soul. To her, faith wasn't something a man could control. It was something that lived within, a spark no church could own. At first, she taught quietly, holding small meetings for women in her home in Boston. They came after chores and childbirth, sitting on wooden benches under the flicker of candlelight, as Anne spoke of grace, of inner light, of a God who didn't need male permission to reach them. But word spread. Men began to come to her meetings, grew from dozens to hundreds. Some said her words lifted their spirits. Others said she threatened to unravel the fabric of the colony itself. In Puritan New England, religion wasn't just belief, it was law. To challenge the ministers was to challenge the entire foundation of their world. Governor John Winthrop called her a woman not fit for our society. He saw her as a serpent, whispering doubt into the ears of the faithful. And so, in November 1637, Anne Hutchinson was brought to trial, the first woman in American history to stand before an all-male government and defend her right to speak. The courtroom was cold, the air thick with tension. Anne stood alone, surrounded by the colony's most powerful men, ministers, magistrates, and elders. The Bible lay on the table like a weapon waiting to be used. Winthrop's voice thundered, "Mrs. Hutchinson, you have stepped out of your place. You have rather been a husband than a wife, a preacher than a hearer, and a magistrate than a subject." Anne met his eyes, calm, steady. "I have only spoken what God has taught me," she said. That sentence, simple as breath, was treason in Puritan Massachusetts. For 2 days, the men interrogated her. They demanded she confess her sins, her disobedience, her pride. But Anne used their own scripture against them. Her knowledge of the Bible outmatched most of the ministers in the room. Each time they tried to trap her, she answered with calm precision. Each time they accused her of arrogance, she reminded them that her teachings were not hers alone, but given by divine inspiration. And then she said the one thing that sealed her fate. "I hear the voice of God, and he tells me what is truth." A gasp rippled through the room. To claim personal revelation was to put herself above the church, above the male hierarchy that ruled it. To them, this wasn't faith. It was blasphemy. Governor Winthrop's face turned to stone. "The court knows that Mrs. Hutchinson is deluded by the devil," he declared. "Her revelations are of Satan, not of God." Anne didn't flinch. "You do well to call me deluded," she replied, "for I am not deluded by man." That defiance, that quiet refusal to bend, made her the most dangerous woman in New England. When the trial ended, she was convicted of heresy and sedition, banished from the colony. Her family was forced to leave their home. The same men who had once called her sister in faith now called her witch, Jezebel, heretic. In the dead of winter, she and her family walked through snow and wilderness to find refuge in Rhode Island, among others who had fled Puritan control. There, Anne continued to speak, to live by her faith, and to raise her children. But her story did not end there. Years later, after her husband's death, Anne moved further west, to what is now New York, then a Dutch territory. In 1643, a band of native warriors raided her settlement during a conflict with colonists. Anne and all but one of her children were killed. Governor Winthrop, upon hearing the news, wrote coldly in his journal, "The Lord's hand has gone out against her." To the Puritan fathers, it was divine justice. To history, it was tragedy, the silencing of a voice too far ahead of its time. But Anne Hutchinson's ideas did not die with her. They lingered like seeds carried on the wind. Freedom of conscience, the right to believe without coercion, the right to speak truth even when forbidden. A century later, those same ideas would appear in the language of the American Revolution. 2 centuries later, they would be echoed in the movements for women's rights and freedom of religion. Anne had been condemned for preaching equality in a world that feared it, yet she became one of the first Americans to demand it. Imagine her that day, standing alone before a room of men who held her life in their hands, refusing to recant, her voice calm, her heart burning with conviction. "I am called here to answer before you," she said, "but I hear a higher voice than yours." That voice still echoes today in every woman who speaks when told to stay silent, in every person who dares to believe differently, in every soul who chooses conscience over comfort. History remembers her as a heretic, but in truth, Anne Hutchinson was something far rarer. A woman who believed that her soul belonged to no one but God. And in 17th century America, that belief was enough to change everything. She paid for it with exile. She paid for it with her life. But her courage became the foundation of freedom itself. She was the woman who dared to preach, and the world has never been the same since.